So the last thing to mention here about utilitarianism, I mean, there's a lot more that one can say about utilitarianism, but these, two class periods at least give a general overview and focus on some of the major tenets of utilitarianism. We will see this phrase and this terminology come back up later in the semester when we talk about animal ethics, and when we get there, I think that you'll be able to kind of recognize and see how some of these conversations of utilitarianism, how some of these tenets of utilitarianism can apply to various areas of ethical concern, including animal ethics. Okay? All right. So the last two kind of aspects of utilitarianism worth mentioning here is what's called act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Okay? And I want to start with rule utilitarianism. And rule utilitarianism isn't all too difficult to kind of recognize here, right? And it should be said, and I feel like I neglected this in one of the previous videos when talking about the greatest happiness principle, especially when talking about kind of the quantity of pleasures, right? The amount. Often a phrase that is used in reference to utilitarianism is the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? That we should produce those actions, or we should pursue those actions that produce the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? And again, the word good here is the greatest amount of pleasure, the greatest amount of happiness. Okay? So we should pursue those things which cause the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? The most good for the most people. Okay? And that is kind of a utilitarian reference. That is a utilitarian focus. And so transitioning that to act and rule utilitarianism, we have rule utilitarianism, which focuses on the implementing and I'm escaping a word here. The implementing of various rules, laws, policies, procedures that are put in place for the fact that hopefully if people follow them, the greatest good for the greatest number will result. Pardon me, I feel like I said that a little bit confusingly. But if you think about it in terms of laws, right, and this is how I think how the example kind of works, right, that if everyone follows the law, that one shouldn't murder, okay, that rule from those who make the rules, right, that rule is put in place that if everybody follows it, then the greatest good for the greatest number will occur for the fact that not everybody will go around killing one another, right? So again, we have this focus on the fact that a lot of us follow rules. And I mean, again, we can think about it, these rules, these guidelines, right, of wearing a mask, okay? That if more people wear these, the reduction of the spread of coronavirus, of COVID-19, the spread of it will diminish, right? And so, from a rule perspective, a rule utilitarian perspective, right, wearing a mask does bring about the greatest good for the greatest number, okay? And so we follow rules all the time, sometimes with this utilitarian framework, okay? Now, act utilitarianism is a little bit different, okay? And this is where, again, utilitarianism has such a strong footing in being a very plausible kind of moral ethical theory. Not even plausible. It is a strong moral and ethical theory, okay? But act utilitarianism makes the recognition here, that there might be certain circumstances where you maybe break the rule. Or there might be certain circumstances that going outside of the guidelines, going outside of the rules seems permissible. Okay? And again, doing that kind of utilitarian calculus to do so. Okay? Where there's a focus on specific actions in regards to the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? So maybe there aren't rules put in place, or if there are rules put in place, maybe there's a justification as it relates to breaking that rule for the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? And so this is where, again, we return all the way back to our Dr. X example. Okay? So we return all the way back to our Dr. X example, where what we have with the Dr. X example is that Dr. X broke the rule. She broke the law of killing this homeless person, but maybe she's justified. Maybe she's justified by the fact that she just cured COVID-19, right? She goes outside the rules, she goes outside of the law, but yet she does so in order to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number, okay? Now, that example definitely follows kind of the ACT framework, the ACT utilitarians framework, but we also get a couple of other, I think, really clever examples here. And this is one of my all-time favorite ones as it relates to utilitarianism. Okay? So I think I heard this over a decade ago in my ethics class when I was an undergrad, and it's still stuck with me. Okay? So imagine you're going with some friends and you're going spelunking. Okay? And spelunking, if you're not familiar, is cave exploring. Okay? So you're going to go cave exploring. And you and your friends, let's say there's like a group of 9 of you. Okay? There's a group of 9 of you and you're going cave exploring, and you know, it's this really kind of, you know, enchanting cave, and like it's got lots of caverns, and you know, it's got some water, like it's kind of like a sea cave, okay? Where you enter, but then you're like kind of waist deep in some water, but then you like swim under some things, and then you come out and you're in this cave, and it's just impressive, and it's just beautiful. And there's like a little bit of a hole up top on the top of the cave, and so like some sunlight's coming through, which just adds to the dramatic nature of what you're experiencing, and yeah, and so it's just like beautiful, okay? And so, and it's also like a dead end. Like you enter this cavern from only one direction in, and then when you leave, you have to go the same direction. So it's a dead end, kind of cul-de-sac, if you will, of a cave. Okay? And so you go in, and it's beautiful, and you're just, you know, snapping pictures to post on Instagram, and your waterproof case covering for your phone. You're, you know, just enamored by the beauty of this pristine sea cave. But then you notice that the way that you came in is now having all of a sudden a bunch of water kind of rush into it. And you don't know why, okay? But this water's coming in, like I said, I mean, the cave is a dead end, okay? And so the only way out would be through this rushing water, and you and your team are getting to get a bit nervous here. You're getting nervous for the fact that like your escape route is looking pretty unlikely. And so there's a high probability that all of you might drown, okay? But then you remember that there's this little hole up on top of the cave, and some sunlight's coming through. And so one of your spelunking team members decides, all right, what I'm going to do is I'll climb up there, right? And they'll drop a rope back down. And you're like, okay, great. Yeah, do it. Water's rushing in, and anxiety's, you know, building, and people are getting real scared. And then, right, all of a sudden, this person that climbs up there, they're a little bit overly ambitious, and they're like pushing their way like out of the cave like this, and then all of a sudden, they just get stuck, okay? Like a cork coming out of a wine bottle, okay? Where like half of their torso is out, like their head and their arms are above, outside, in the fresh air, where their legs are now just dangling below them, okay? And like kind of a comical scene if you really think about it, but ultimately a really scary scene because now you can't communicate with that person that's up there and their legs are just dangling down below you. Okay? And so now the rest of your team is all panicking, right? There was 9 of you, now one of them is stuck up there in the hole, plugged on up. So then, now the suggestion is another team member has some dynamite. So the thought is, if this is your stuck spelunker, okay, to put dynamite around the waist of this stuck spelunker, light the fuse, make the hole bigger, but also coming at the expense of the life of the stuck spelunker. So you wedge the dynamite up around the spelunker's waist. Okay? You can't tell them what's going to happen because they can't hear you. They're outside the cave. Do you light the switch? Do you break the rule that says one should not murder? Because if you break the rule and you blow up the spelunker, right, that's my dynamite. You blow up the spelunker, that hole gets bigger, somebody can climb out there, drop a rope down, 8 of you are saved. But it comes at the expense of blowing up your friend. What do you do? Right? And so these are questions that the utilitarian has to respond to accurately. I mean, not even accurately. These are questions that the utilitarian has to respond to thoughtfully. Right? I mean, I think the intuition by many is, yeah, blow the stuck spelunker up. Make the hole bigger. Get out of there. Save yourself. Right? Because one dies and saves 9. Or saves 8. Right? But still a pretty uncomfy question. And there are another handful of kind of like scenarios like this, most famously the trolley problem, or something. It's called the trolley problem, which I'll post a video to kind of what those are. But I mean, these scenarios are not uncommon, okay? And they can be kind of like fun to think about and little brain ticklers to kind of like think about and question, but also they can be pretty challenging. And then the opposite of this, right, is like the utilitarian hero, one could say. And I mean, one of the classic examples here is, let's say it's a matter of wartime and you're out with your patrol. Let's say again, let's just take the consistent number. There's 9 of you in your patrol. A grenade is thrown in front of your group, and one person jumps on the grenade, sacrifices themselves to save the other. Right? So it's kind of like an inverse utilitarianism. It's like an inverse kind of, again, I mean, we often call the people that self-sacrifice like that heroes. And they are heroes in the fact that what they are doing is they're sacrificing their self for the rest of the group. They are doing the greatest good for the greatest number at the expense of their own well-being, right? So again, we got different ways of thinking about how this all works. We got different ways of thinking about how utilitarianism plays out in these various kind of capacities. And we'll see utilitarianism again, like I said, in the later part of the semester, but I hope that this gives you a foundation and at least an awareness that this theory of thinking about the greatest good for the greatest number is still alive and well and is often still adhered to time and time again. Cheers.